Welcome back to the Wardrobe of Woe. First off, I'd like to apologize for no upload yesterday. As you can hear in my nasally voice, I am sick, so um, I have been taking a little bit of me time, spending most of yesterday and today resting. But anyway, in today's video, we're going to be explaining some Age of Sigmar terms and stats on various units, and you might hear me say some of these in other videos, and this is explaining what I mean by those. Hopefully it'll clear up some confusion for new players or people who are looking into getting into Age of Sigmar, and hopefully I could break it down in a easy to understand way. Now, this is in no means an all-inclusive explanation. This is mostly just what I thought of or what I use in my videos and what could be better explained. If you have any other terms that you or the community use a lot that you think would fit in this category, please leave it down in the comments below. I always enjoy seeing what other people use. So first off, some basic information that we need to get out of the way is Age of Sigmar is a D6 based system. So what that means is anytime you hear me say a D6 of XYZ or a D3 or something, you're pretty much only going to be using D6. I don't think there's any abilities that don't use a D6 or some derivative of that. D3s are used a lot, but you can roll a D6 and just say 1, 2 is equal to 1, 3, 4 is equal to 2, and 5, 6 is equal to 3, just kind of half the value. You'll hear me say to hit, to wound, and to save a whole lot when going over units. These are all based on a D6. So, for example, if you are hitting on 3s, your attacks will only miss if you roll a 1 or a 2 on a D6. And a lot of conditional abilities will have a similar rule where it's like, this ability activates on a 3 up, or a 4 up, or a 6 up, for example. And on the left hand of the screen, I have put a little chart explaining and kind of visualizing what all of these mean and why pluses to hit and minuses to hit are kind of really valuable because they all increase your percentage chance of something happening by a significant degree. And so something hitting on 3s versus something hitting on 5s is a big leap in accuracy. So it's something you should always be taking into consideration when judging the stats of these units or monsters. Many abilities give pluses or minuses to these different stats, and so it's basically just a modifier on your base stat. So if you have a base to hit rate of 3, and your commander gives you a buff to +1 to hit, you are now hitting on 2 ups. Conversely, if your opponent gives you a debuff that's a -1 to hit, then you are now hitting on 4 ups. There's only one caveat here, or one thing of note that I think is important, is save rolls can only be modified by +1. So save rolls, I'll explain those a little bit more in depth later in the video, but basically those are your armor saves. That's like how likely the model's armor is going to deflect an enemy attack. And it can only go up +1. But it can go less than -1. It's a little bit odd, but hopefully I'll explain that later. So, unit stats. Oftentimes when I'm going over a unit for a battle line review or just analyzing a specific unit, you'll hear me talk about their stat line and how it's movement, bravery, wounds, and saves. So some of these are pretty self-explanatory. Movement, that is how far they move. In Age of Sigmar, everything is based on inches. So a movement characteristic is how many inches a unit can move at base. Bravery is a little funky. It is how brave or more likely a model in this unit will run away due to battle shock. And unlike most other things, bravery goes from 0 to 10. So it's not on that D6 system. So just something to keep in mind. Wounds, this is just a fancy way of saying how many health points does an individual model in this unit have. So on the left-hand screen, we have the stat wheel for some Skaven clan rats. And you can see in that unit, at base, there's 20 models. Each of those models has 1 hit point. Saves, like I mentioned previously, is how good the unit's armor is. and save rolls is how you negate enemy damage. So on to the weapon stats. I'll go over these a whole bunch in my videos. So range is pretty self-explanatory. It is how far away an enemy unit can be for the model to attack it. So when measuring how many attacks get in, you measure per model. Um, so you will have your, for example, these clan rats, you'll have them lined up, and for each model that is within 1 inch or 2 inch, depending on which weapon you've given them, it'll determine if they can hit the opponent or not. Attacks, this is how many dice each model get to use for their to hit roll. So think of it as a multiplicative value to for how many dice you're going to be throwing for each attack. So to hit roll is how likely your attacks will land on an opponent, and to wound is how likely your landed hits will actually hurt the enemy. Rend is how much your attacks reduce the enemy's save characteristic. Or if you are from 40k, this is armor penetration. And armor penetration is just another way to think about this. Damage, it is how many wounds each attack is worth. That's pretty self-explanatory. So we'll go over a basic attack and defending sequence. So first, you calculate how many attacks you get to throw at the enemy. So count up how many models are in range to attack an enemy and multiply that value by how many attacks they get each. And then you're going to roll a 2 hit roll, and anything successful moves on to wound. And those successes move on to the next stage, where the enemy will roll a 2 save roll. So however many wounds get through, the enemy rolls that many dice, and they have to try and save them with their armor value. Then you calculate the amount of damage done, and then allocate wounds. Now for allocating wounds, you must allocate them all on one model until it is slain, and then you must move on to the next one. And I'll explain this in the next section. So an example attack sequence of 20 clan rats versus 10 liberators goes as the following. So 20 clan rats armed with blades get 1 attack each, and the leader clan rat in this unit gets 2 attacks. So you have a total number of attacks of 21. You roll 21 dice, and for each one that is a 4 up, successfully hits. For this example, we'll say 11 successfully hit. Then you roll the number that was successful, in our case 11, and then for each 4 up, you successfully wound. For this example, we'll say 5 successfully wound. Now the enemy liberators roll 5 dice against their save roll of a 4 up. And then we'll say the liberators save 3 attacks. So 2 attacks get through the armor, and since these attacks are 1 damage each, the liberators take 2 damage. And these liberators have 2 health each, so 1 model is slain. So back to what I was saying for allotting damage is you can't just spread the damage out evenly. You have to put it on 1 model until it is slain, and then you move on to the next model. So next, something that isn't so intuitive is Bravery. Bravery is kind of funky and doesn't work all that well in Age of Sigmar, and you'll see that I often rate abilities that lower Bravery or modify Bravery in some way lower because Bravery is just not reliable. And there are many things, in fact, every army in the game has access to an ability that just negates Bravery for a command point. So Bravery is the measure of the discipline of your units. At base, it ranges from 0 to 10, although I think the lowest Bravery I've seen on a base model is 4 for clan rats, but I don't know off the top of my head. So after all the phases of the game, you do a battle shock test. So for each unit that lost models, you do a bravery test. So you take the bravery of the unit you're testing and add the number of models slain this turn. Then you roll 1d6 and compare the two numbers. The difference in the numbers of models, excuse me, the difference in those two numbers is the amount of models that flee from battle shock. So what does this look like? So let's take the Liberators versus Clan Rats example from the previous section, and we'll say the Liberators swing back and kill 5 Clan Rats. So Clan Rats, that's a typo on my part. Clan Rats Bravery is 4. So you take 4, add the number of models slain, which was 5, and that equals 9. You roll a d6, and you get a 6. So 9 minus 6 is 3. 3 more Clan Rats are slain or run away due to battle shock and fear. If the value is negative, no models are slain. The only way to gain models back with battle shock is if demons, like lesser demons, most of the time will have a banner or icon that if you roll a 1 on a battle shock roll, you can add a certain number of demons back. But beyond that, I think those are the only models that can gain something from battle shock. Next, we'll move on to magic. Magic is the other thing that is a little bit more iffy whenever you hear me talk about it. So how magic works is you pick a spell and you check its casting value. Casting values range from 4 is about the lowest I've seen up to 8 or 9. I think most spells top out at 8. Then you roll 2d6, and if your roll meets or beats the casting value, then the spell is cast. Then enemies can try to unbind the spell, in which they roll 2d6 and need to beat your casting roll. To attempt an unbind, they must be within 30 inches of the caster. If the enemy fails the unbind, they get less than or equal to whatever you rolled, then the spell takes place. Next up is unit types and roles. You'll hear me use a lot of these phrases to sum up a unit's battlefield roles. This list is not inclusive, all inclusive, and many people make up their own definitions for similar things. This is just what I've heard a lot in my time playing Age of Sigmar and what I've come up with for good ways to describe certain units. So first up is a tar pit. The tar pit units are supposed to slow down the enemy with their bodies. They are a speed bump, and they're there to take up space, really, and prevent enemies from going somewhere or doing something. They are valuable in their own right. You just need to know how to use them correctly. Next up, we have a screen unit. This is similar to the tar pit, but is a little bit more fine-tuned. So screen units are there to prevent enemy units from getting to high-value units or targets, as well as objectives. So think of a tar pit as like a fill bucket tool. It just fills the screen with whatever paint you're needing, whereas a screen is a pencil or pen tool. If you're I'm using this analogy as like MS Paint or something like that. A tar pit is a broad category just to do a whole bunch of things, versus screen, which is specific and precise. Um, and then cavalry. Cavalry, if you are a history buff, is generally horse-mounted military units. But in Age of Sigmar, cavalry is broad because many things aren't necessarily horses. Cavalry is fast-moving, whose job it is to threaten enemy flanks and undefended objectives. It basically gives you a lot of flexibility with movement and playing around on the board. Melee units, as the name suggests, are focused on close quarters combat and have little to no ranged capabilities. And they want to get stuck in there and just start swinging. Ranged units are focused on dealing damage at range and tend to stay out of melee combat. Something to note with ranged units, in Age of Sigmar, you can shoot your ranged weapon inside of melee combat, but if the ranged unit is in melee combat, you can only target the unit that you are in combat with. So there's value in tagging a ranged unit in melee, so they can't shoot wherever they want. So it kind of forces them to target something that is less valuable. Hybrid units are units that can do both ranged and melee. They are fairly rare, and I think I've only used this term once, but that doesn't mean that that is out of the range of possibilities. Hybrid units are a little bit hard to define because they can go into melee or ranged combat. And then some role modifiers. So I'll say this is an offensive tar pit or this is a defensive tar pit. All this means is this unit has a high affinity or emphasis on dealing damage, or if it's defensive, it has a high emphasis on taking damage and being hard to get rid of. And that was a quick overview of some Age of Sigmar basics and some Age of Sigmar stats and terms explained. I apologize for the lack of upload, as well as my nasally voice. I am sick. I am feeling better, but we'll see how long this cold holds on to being for. Um, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like or a comment, and if you'd like to see more, I would appreciate it if you would subscribe. If there is any other terms or stats that you would like me to explain, you can leave it down in the comments, and I'll try and reply to you as best I can. And also, if you have any other terms that you or your local game group uses that you think would be beneficial for other people to know, leave those in the comments as well. I enjoy seeing the discussion that sometimes pops up in my comment section. So anyway, this has been the Wardrobe of Woe, and I'll see you next time.